it was a lot of emotional stuff and mental stuff inside the home. And then I grew up around gangs, so I couldn't exit my home almost for any reason at all, period. I couldn't take a stroll around the block because it was too dangerous. That's how I described this period of time. It felt like I died and I was reborn. That's how it felt. It was that stark. It was that horrendous. It felt like I died. Like
Right.
that me is gone and I was reborn. And the way that I was reborn in part was by being very diligent about finding evidence of who I used to be and trying to remember that person so that that person could save me.
I want to welcome everybody back to another episode of Soul Inspired. Today, I have Amparo Vazquez with us. She is a coach and a healer, and she works with a company called Astekah. And she is going to be talking to us today about overcoming mental abuse and also CPTSD. We're going to talk to her a little bit. But first of all, thank you so much, Amparo, for being here today on
Thank
Soul
you.
Inspired.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
As I was saying before the episode, this is a little bit different from some of the episodes we run, but I'm really excited to see what your life journey has been and how you overcame the obstacles you've gone through.
Yeah.
So, and this can be a delicate subject for some. So I just appreciate you taking the time and coming on and talking about everything. So I tend to run things in a certain way. And usually what I look at is I don't know when all this began in your life, but I
Mm,
generally first try to ask you if you look at the events that unfolded in your life to get you to where you're at, could be
yeah.
the things that you went through, the traumas you went through. I don't know when that happened, but who were you before all that? Like what type of person were you and how old were you at that time?
It's a really good question. So, I want to preface it by saying that I'm very grateful that I got to experience before me, because it was that before me that rescued me. Wasn't the only entity that rescued me, but it was a big component of what rescued me. So I grew up in a rough situation, but in between that rough situation and what I found myself in as an adult, I experienced that before. So I was very bubbly. I was very easily excitable. I was very innocent. I was very service oriented. These are all things that I'm saying was because I lost it and I had to reclaim it. So the person that you're seeing now, I'm bubbly again. I had to reclaim that. So I was a very innocent person who was very high on life. I had a couple people comment on how they wanted to bottle that up because it was so infectious and it was so very potent, that very exuberant approach that I had to life. I was very trusting. I used to get into arguments with one of my family members on nature of humanity, and I knew about sociopaths, I knew about mass murderers, but to me they were a very small portion. Like that part of the human experience was such a small portion in my mind. And I saw it as an outlier, like completely separate from anything that I could ever experience myself or come close to experiencing myself, like the darker, heavier side of life. Even though I grew up around gangs, I grew up around drugs, I grew up around a lot of, again, heavy stuff, but I had a, not to be mean to that me, but in some ways I had a little bit of a Pollyanna approach to things, because it's how I had survived my childhood experience. I used to fawn a lot. Fawn is a trauma response where you sort of shut yourself off from being able to absorb too much of the complexity of the heaviness of what you're seeing so that you can just focus on the positive, but to the point of suppressing,
Mhm.
like completely suppressing even your ability to see details that would let you know, hey, what you're experiencing right now is harmful. So I was a very bright person during that time.
Okay, so thank you for sharing that. So you're saying that you were a bubbly person, innocent in a way. You had a lot of innocence about you. You
Yeah.
were growing up in this lifestyle. You had this ideology of what was out there that was bad, but it really wasn't part of your world, and that seemed like a state of denial in a sense, just to protect yourself.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know your story. This is the first I'll learn about it, but I can kind of get a sense of who you were. How old were you around then before things started to happen? Would this have been like young child, teenager, young adult, like when?
Yeah, so I call it the golden era, the golden age of my life. That was college, so I was 18 to I was about 22, 23 when the second rough period started, completely unbeknownst to me because as many abuse survivors can let you know, the very beginning involves something called love bombing, where you are thrown into the deep end, what feels like really intense, positive emotion and love. But it's manipulative, it's disingenuous, disingenuine. I don't know what version of that word to use, but so it feels very highly positive at the very beginning when a lot of people find themselves in abusive situations. It's one of the things that sort of screws up your ability to be able to trust
Mm.
later on. Like, how do you trust any display of love if what you thought was really intense love in this other situation turned out to be torturous later
Okay.
on? So it was like 7 years where I got to experience who I really was because I was in so much safety. And I increasingly healed during that time. And the more that I healed from what I had experienced as a child, the more that I got to experience who I actually was outside of hardship.
Okay. So because you said 17, so before the age of
18.
17, oh, 18. Okay. Before the age of 18, were you experiencing trauma in your life?
Yeah.
Okay. And would you be able to share some of that? Would you be able to share kind of what you went through a little bit, just so we can kind of get a better understanding of what was going on?
Yeah. So, out of respect for people in my life, I don't want to share too many details. I'll just share that I grew up with a lot of abuse inside the house and outside the house. There was a lot that I endured 24/7, it felt like. And then it was a lot of emotional stuff and mental stuff inside the home. And then I grew up around gangs, so I couldn't exit my home almost for any reason at all, period. I couldn't take a stroll around the block because it was too dangerous. I might get kidnapped, I might get shot, I might get stabbed. I'm at the least I'll get catcalled and potentially like someone will try to kidnap me because I know people that happened to, including a family member of mine attempted kidnap. And then at school, I grew up with bullies. So I had bullies from the ages of 6 to about 14. So I also experienced a lack of safety in the school during that time. So I wasn't safe anywhere outside of dreamland, literal, and also self-conceived dreamland. So the way that I survived my childhood, because I was in a state of constant danger or constant being torn down to one degree or another by people who saw me as a threat to their own sense of like well-being just by existing, is I partake in something called maladaptive daydreaming. So I would create whole worlds inside of my own head, whole lives. I I've lived countless lives just because of that period of time. I
Mm.
would say that that started when I was about 10, maybe 9, maybe 8. And it became this really strong form of addiction where I would sort of lose myself. I wouldn't be able to pay attention to the details that were in front of me. It was complete disassociation. And it would take place over the course of hours or days. And I was just not there. I was completely checked out. And I couldn't pull myself to the present moment. I didn't have a choice. And that was my biggest survival mechanism, again, from the time that I was about 10 to the time that I was about 21, 22, I would say. And so that speaks to my main survival technique in this life, which has been suppression. And that's something that I would realize as an adult that I was still doing as an adult. Unbeknownst to me, my subconscious was hiding memories from myself. And once outside of danger is when all that stuff gets unlocked inside of you. At least it did for me.
Right. Okay. Wow. Thanks for sharing that. I know that's delicate stuff. So you went through this most of your childhood up until about 22, you said? Okay. So you're going through that and you're creating, you said, maladaptive daydreaming. So is this a form of fantasy living? Like, are you living in a fantasy world of something you're not actually going through in order to survive?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So
Yeah.
that was going on all the time from childhood, and you were learning this behavior because that was your survival technique.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you
Yeah.
get out of it because you get into a safe place, but then you're still
Yeah.
doing this. How did
I'm
you
still doing
so
it.
so so how did you recognize, if you just to help people out there, like how did you
Yeah.
recognize this was still going on?
I mean, you could just get pulled into it. Like you were in the middle of a conversation and all of a sudden you can't even see the person in front of you because all you can see is the image that's playing out in your head. You stop being a person. You're not a person during that experience.
Mm.
So, and it interferes with your studies. Obviously, you can't really study if your mind is so used to doing this. And what I figured out was there was a big part of my subconscious that didn't believe that I was strong enough to handle life, period.
Right.
And so because I didn't believe that I could handle life, it was like, you know what we're gonna do instead? We're gonna create whole other worlds where you are strong, you are fit, you are loved, or you're away from everyone who is currently hurting you. And you are going to be in total control of your life there. And that's where you're going to live. And that's where I'm going to pull you anytime you even feel remotely stressed out. Cool. So that's what my mind did. And then I got to college and I got into Stanford and then quickly realized I cannot function at a place like Stanford doing this. No, I can handle high school doing this. Where I grew up, cannot handle a place like Stanford doing this. So I started to pull myself out of it in college, which speaks to like you never know what kind of a journey someone is going through, even at the young age of 18, right? And I was able to get to the point of being functional during college. No one knew this. It was one person who knew that this was a thing that I struggled with. And then after college, I stayed in that area, decided to live with some friends. And it was my first time having like healthy in-person connection in a home environment. And my mind was still doing this. And I
Mm.
realized that it was preventing me from being able to connect with people. So there was one moment in time in which I was in a car ride with three other people, and everyone was having a conversation. We were just having such a really nice, good time. I could not help feeling like I was being pulled into it was like a black hole that like pulled me into this as hard as I wanted to be present and paying attention
Mm.
to the conversation that was taking place there, the connection. I couldn't. I didn't have a choice at that point, and I didn't feel like I did. I felt very weak. I felt completely powerless to be able to not do this. And it was in that moment in time when I realized I need to stop. I don't know how. I need to figure out how to stop. And I did. So in a matter of 2 years from that point forward, I was very intentional about pulling myself back, pulling myself. So the time in which I would get lost in maladaptive daydreaming got shorter and shorter, and the time in between episodes got wider and wider. And by the end of those roughly 2 years, it was like a thing of the past. And having pulled myself from such a strong addiction that was to something inside of me, it wasn't to a substance, it was something inside of me,
Mm.
served as such a hugely important bookmark in my life, a foundational experience that taught me that I was that strong, that I didn't know. Because the message that I'd received all my childhood from many sources was, you are weak. You are weak. You are nothing. You are ugly. You are stupid. Those
Mm.
were the messages that I got over and over and over again from different sources. So that was my conception of myself. And then I did that. And I realized, excuse my language, there's more to me.
Mhm.
There's more to this. And that would then be one of the foundational rocks of this new identity that I would construct and that I would then reconstruct later when I had to rebuild myself all over again as an adult.
Okay, so I have a few questions.
Yeah.
And I appreciate the way you broke this down because what you're telling us is that you went through the childhood trauma. Um, you never were seeking help during that time. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so, oh, you were?
actually,
Sorry.
yeah, to the degree that I thought that I could, because when you're in that type of situation, you're also taught things like you're a traitor if you try to seek help, or you're the problem, or things like that that often prevent children from being able to seek help.
Mm.
So I did, but bad things often happened. I would get in trouble or something not great would happen. So I mostly kept to myself. I just wanted to clarify that.
Sure. So you did seek help, but then you were always brought back out of it based on your surroundings. They
Yeah.
people made you feel as if that wasn't necessary, that, it's
Yeah.
almost okay, so you just continued to not self-inflict, but kind of internally you were continuing to create this dynamic that was going on. The thing that was really interesting, so I had anxiety
Mm,
I would say once you have anxiety, in a way, you kind of understand anxiety, you feel anxiety, you kind of have it for life. It's like I've identified it, and now I just need to learn how to cope and how to
mm,
move through it when I have those moments. But I was told one time I had generalized anxiety because I was continuously just not present.
mm,
Different situations from what you went through, but there were things in my life that probably led me up to it, and then I created a dissociation as well, but it wasn't in the same sense. So I'm trying to see if anxiety is kind of like a brother or sister to to this type of behavior you were having, because I can
yeah,
remember being in big groups and being kind of blanked, like kind of like what's going on, almost like confused in a state of like I'm here but I'm not. And I remember one time I went in and I was probably in my late teens, and I went in to get a coffee or like a cappuccino or something, and I ordered it and I paid for it, and I had this attack of anxiety,
yeah.
and I had to leave. I had to run, and the girl's looking at me trying to hand me my cup, and I ran out without it. And she probably thought, what was that? Like, he paid for it. I wasted my money, and I ran out, got my car, and took off. So it was
Yeah,
like this type of thing happened. It didn't happen all the time, but I had those moments. So when you say
yeah,
daydreaming, it kind of felt like that, but in a sense of like I need to flee, which is sounds different. Yours almost seems like you're surviving in it by creating some other scenario.
yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what was happening. I've
Okay.
had that as well, by the way. I'm just like, nope, can't handle this. Bye.
Right. You're just gone. Right. Yeah. So I
See
did have
you
that.
never.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly what happened. So I created whole worlds inside of my head, whole universes, whole storylines. And it was really interesting because they would play out over the course of like weeks or months. And they always had, even if the storylines were different in a lot of significant ways, they always had certain core themes. So I was usually alone, didn't have friends, didn't have family because I had experienced so much pain from both. And so very often in these fantasies, I was by myself. I had a romantic interest because Disney and all sorts of other media had placed in my head that, you know what, even if you're safe nowhere else, you're safe if you find this one person. So it was always this romantic interest to this partner who was protective of me as I was protective of him. Because I lacked that feeling of protection. I didn't feel
Mm,
protected anywhere. I didn't feel like anyone was really taking care of me.
right.
And so it had that. And then there would be bad guys and there would be these themes I would play out. And then when I would get to the place of resolution, where it's like, okay, I'm so strong in this image, in this world that nothing can hurt me, I'd get bored. And then I'd create a whole new storyline. And I did this countless times. At some point, I put that together. I was like, oh my God, what's wrong with me?
Right.
I'm I get bored when things are okay. What?
Mm.
So I started to analyze at some point these fantasies themselves, and they told me a lot about my psyche. They told me a lot about um, what it is that I wanted, but I didn't know why. And so that came later as well, like
Yeah.
peeling apart why I wanted what I wanted. Yeah.
I was gonna say that takes a lot to recognize it from an individual perspective, like for yourself to recognize that, right? Because I think having someone tell you and listen to your story and diagnose you as something you're going through is different from actually coming to having it come clearly to yourself.
Yeah.
And I think it takes a lot of strength to go, what's going on? Like something's up here, right? Like what's going on? I can relate with anxiety. I can relate to it because
Yeah.
I'm thinking I'm having every, anything, any little tweak I'd have, something's wrong with me, and I'd be going to the doctor and going. So it's in a sense, and then eventually I went, okay, but what's going on? What's really
Yeah.
going on? And then you have to kind of break that down. It sounded like you did a good job with it. Before I talk about how you went through the healing journey of it, right? I wanted to
Yeah.
know if you could explain the difference, and I kind of mentioned this before we started recording tonight, but the difference between PTSD and CPTSD. I want to know if you could kind of break that down a little bit, if it had to do with what you were dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely. So PTSD, I'm sure the average person knows about post-traumatic stress disorder, right? CPTSD is complex PTSD. So the main difference between them is that PTSD arises usually from a single traumatizing experience like a car accident, or a short period of time of traumatizing experiences. Complex PTSD arises from an elongated period of time, months to years to decades of recurring traumatizing experiences. And they don't have to be like someone's beating you senseless every day. It could be death by a thousand cuts, which is akin to what I experienced of constant lack of safety and criticism and gaslighting. The vast majority of what I experienced over the course of my life was a lot of gaslighting to the point, especially as an adult, it was so severe that I started to lose my mind. So I know what that experience is like, where people, I've seen it written down so many times since then, of gaslighting makes you feel like you're losing your mind. It does. And it doesn't feel like you are. It feels that you are losing your mind, that you don't know what reality is anymore, that you can't trust what your eyes see, your ears hear anymore. You can't trust your memories because they're always being questioned. How do you know that that happened the way that you remember that it did? And you question your thoughts, you question your judgment, you question everything. So every single foundational component of you as a human being, as a sensory-oriented person that needs to retain memory and conceptualize things and has to have complete thoughts and opinions and needs and wants, broken. So I had to
Okay.
rebuild myself from the ground up in every single one of those respects. And
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
just to go off of
So
a segue.
no, no, that's no, you explained it. You explained it perfectly. Sometimes I re-explain things to myself and my audience. My audience probably gets annoyed with me, but I don't think they realize I'm actually saying this for me. I love all you, but a lot of times it's me actually trying to understand it. They're like, why does he repeat what she said? Because she just said it. No, I'm repeating it so I can understand it. And so unfortunately, hopefully people like it. But the way that I got that is this: you have PTSD and CPTSD. And PTSD, you could have one very traumatic event that can every once in a while affect you, right? And you're affected because of that post-traumatic,
Yeah,
that actual event or that moment.
yeah,
Whereas the complex version of it is a number of events stacked on top of each other that
yeah.
turn into a more severe, chronic absence of reality.
Feeling of trauma, I would say.
Feeling of trauma. So you're
Experience of trauma within your body and
okay,
your
so you're
mind.
actually feeling the effects of trauma even when you're in a safe place.
Yeah.
Okay.
Uh, so CPTSD varies by person, right? In my case, what I experienced both as a child and adult was lack of safety, like everywhere inside the house, outside the house for years at a time. And it was more severe as an adult. And the way that your mind works, but by the way, knowing as much as I did know about the brain was so helpful in helping me to heal, to understand what I had lived through once I was finally in safety and I could understand, oh my God, I was suppressing information. Oh my God, this happened because of this and this and this. Just take a deep breath. Um, so the way that the subconscious works is it creates associations between things to help you to more quickly understand how to get your way around things, how to survive, how to understand what means what in your world. You're doing this from the time that you're born in order to help you understand, like, when the temperature is this degree and you feel it this way, that means that your mom is going to come and wrap you up in a blanket. So you come to associate cold with blanket. Or when you're hungry and you cry, your mom comes and gives you food. Therefore, when you cry, that's when you get food. Like your brain is always trying to learn about how to best deal with its environment, how to cope, how to strategize with its environment by helping you to learn what usually means what, like what two things can be paired together. So in my experience, my mind came to associate very benign, ordinary things with lack of safety. So it came to associate nighttime with torture, because the vast majority of the abuse that I lived, the severity of the abuse, a lot of verbal abuse, a lot of mental abuse, a lot of emotional abuse, a lot of neglect, intentional neglect, intentional like just a lot of different forms of interrelated, complicated abuse. A lot of it happened at nighttime. A lot of it happened in a bedroom. And so my mind came to associate nighttime, bedrooms, beds, cars, again, ordinary things with torture. So what ended up happening is after escaping and being rescued, um, and my mind suddenly realizing, hey, I'm safe. Let's suddenly deal with all the trauma that you've been suppressing for X number of years. Um, that's when I realized, oh my God, it's nighttime and I cannot stop my heart from racing, like if I'm running a marathon and I'm in fight or flight mode and I'm feeling terrified and there's no reason why. And I'm having all sorts of scary images playing out of my head. And that happened, I think once or twice. And then I put it together and I realized, oh, wow, okay. My mind associates nighttime with danger. This is going to be fun. How do you exist as a human being when nighttime is something that your mind associates with danger? So it
Right.
took me years to unravel that and heal that.
Again, I want to say though, it's amazing that you started to do that because what you're doing. So first of all, I was going to say those moments, it's almost like triggers. There was triggers that would put
Yeah.
you into that state, right? And then the what helped you overcome it was the awareness. So
Yes.
your awareness started working where you were becoming aware of what you were doing, right? So
Yeah.
that's I mean that's probably I would assume that's probably one of the first steps to kind of like to healing, I would assume, but
Yeah.
um okay, so here you are after 22 and you're now recognizing something is going on and you're wanting to heal. So, or no, sorry, is that incorrect? You look like you had something to say there.
22 is when I entered the second dangerous, the adult dangerous thing. So when
Oh,
I escaped, I was actually 33. So
okay. So
it was
22
a
is when
little,
you
it was a
entered your
little
second
after.
moment. Okay.
It's
Okay.
23, 24 or something like that. It was my
Okay.
mid 20s, but it
Oh.
was until 33.
So this is interesting then.
Yeah.
So you're going through all these traumatic events as a child. And when you become 22, you have an adult version of the same stuff going into the age of, you said about 33.
Yeah.
So, okay, same type of trauma, or was this different?
Yeah, the same type of trauma, but it was more severe.
Okay.
And from what I can tell, from what I've seen with other survivors, that's not uncommon. It's like the second go around tends to be a lot worse than the first go around. And it's completely unconscious. Like you're not going around the world being like, who is going to abuse me in the same way that I was as a child? Come to me. That's not how it
Right.
works, you know? It's that your mind, your subconscious has paired certain things to help you to survive as a child, normalizing them for you. And so there are certain things that feel normal to you or even feel good to you or they're neutral to you, but to someone who didn't grow up with the same level of abuse that you did, they might easily recognize that as red flags, for example.
Right.
And so yeah, I found myself in the same type of situation, but I didn't know. I didn't know actually until the very end, until after I'd escaped, because I thought that I was in something that was healthy at first. And then I thought that it was my fault or that it was normal, the stuff that we were going through, because you hear all sorts of stuff. Everyone tells you like relationships are hard and they get harder over time. There's a lot of stuff that we tell each other that
Hmm.
normalizes
Yeah.
this, which none of this stuff is true.
No. No,
Yeah.
it's really
Um,
not. It's really not. I just want to step in with that for a minute because real I know totally what you're talking about. We normalize being treated poorly. We normalize what really could be identified as mental abuse or narcissism or all these different things that really are out there, but we see it as no, that's part of growing a relationship. Now, sure, in the
yeah.
beginning of a relationship, sometimes there's things that you have to work through. There's differences in characteristics. There could be a lot of passion that also goes both ways, and you got to kind of. But once that settles, once that dust settles, there really in a relationship should be love. There should be proper treatment, happiness,
Yeah.
joy. We talk about,
Yeah.
you talked about joy in the message I got before from you. And um, so if you're not in that now, were you finding that you're in this because, you had already learned how to deal with that as a child. So this is probably likely maybe why this comes up with people who are survivors of abuse young, and they come into their adulthood and they go through it again and they think, why am I going through it again? Well, because you're the best at surviving it. You've learned how to survive. Someone who
Yeah.
hasn't had to go through that is going to run, be like, ah, no, thanks. But someone
Yes.
who used to it, you're okay. You probably unconsciously, I'm used to this, so I can handle it. Is that
Yes.
fair to say? Okay.
100%. Yeah. I said that. I said a few things to myself over and over and over again that I recognized afterwards were in and of themselves red flags. And one of them was that thought of like, I can survive anything. I can survive anything. So I can get through this. I can get through this. I can get through this. And that in combination with these other isms that had normalized toxicity inside of connections, inside of relationships, it just left me as a really easy target. It was a really easy target. Yeah.
And okay, so you're going through this, and I kind of want to check in with you on how you started to overcome these things a little bit more.
Yeah.
So can you let us know when that happened? So when did you, I mean, you did mention that you started to notice you needed to figure this out. Was that before the second incident that you
That I
recognized it? That you started recognizing that you needed to kind of, because this dissociation that you were having, right?
Oh,
These this right?
oh.
Because
Yeah.
I just want to clear that up. Was that happening earlier on, or did that not happen until you were 33 after the
No, that was
second?
happening throughout my whole life.
Okay.
But the point at which I realized that I needed to stop the maladaptive daydreaming form of it, which is what I could see that I was doing. I didn't know that I was suppressing in any other way. I just knew that maladaptive daydreaming was what I was doing. I stopped that when I was about 21, 22. And
Okay.
then this other thing kicked in. I actually think it was closer to like 24, 25. I don't remember the exact year, but
Mm.
there was a gap in between there when I was like really healthy,
Right.
really healthy, really good.
Good.
Meditating, like it was a good time during that time, spiritual awakening time. Um, and uh, and then I went through this experience. I
Mhm.
was high at the very beginning, thought that this was the best thing ever. It got progressively harder, worse, increased abuse that I couldn't recognize was abuse. Certain people tried to get through to me. I pushed them away, including my work mom, at one of the places where I was working at, that she didn't like how I was being treated.
Mm.
And I don't even remember those conversations. She reminded me of that after I escaped. I have no memory of any of those conversations.
Wow.
Um, and so it was after escaping all of it, in my early 30s that within a couple of weeks in being away from that situation, I was laying down in bed one day and I was like, it was awful. This whole experience was awful. And I was so broken and I was so exhausted, because abuse wears you down. Healing from it wears you down. And I was laying in bed and I was sort of going in and out of consciousness. And as I was doing that, I had the weirdest feeling that I had never felt before, that I was starting to remember and feel things inside of me that I could tell were inside of me, had been inside of me, that I just hadn't had access to, that had been suppressed, repressed. It was the weirdest feeling.
Mm.
And when I woke up from that weird altered nap that I was in, it's when I went through the beginning of what would be about 8 weeks of just all sorts of repressed memories coming to the surface of my psyche. And I wrote like a fiend every day, pages upon pages, as all these memories poured out. With that came realizations of what I had actually lived. I researched what I had lived. I found the term narcissism. I found the term covert narcissism, which fit to a T what I had lived as an adult and what I had lived as a child. And it was a nightmare. And over the course of about 8 weeks, my brain rewrote itself. Like it completely rewrote my understanding of what I had lived my whole life, my whole life. Because I was having repressed memories come to the surface of my psyche from when I was a toddler. It wasn't even like it wasn't a visual memory, it was a felt memory of having been punished, for being a child, during that time and having normal child needs. And yeah, so my mind rewrote itself during that period of time. And that's when I realized, oh my God, I was suppressing. I've heard about people suppressing memories, had no idea my entire life that I was one of them. No idea until that point in time.
So you got, and this happens a lot with, I mentioned a lot. I mean, we do a lot of near death experience talk on here. A lot of people who've had, and it doesn't even need to be someone who crossed over and came back. People who just get to that brink of, I don't want to be here. I'm just done. I'm done. I'm worn out. I'm empty. Everything's done. Some people get to that point, and then the awareness or the recognition of what true happiness is in them comes up. All of a sudden, it like
Mhm.
comes over them, and they go, whoa, where am I? Like, what
Mhm.
is this? Like,
Yeah.
where, how have I gotten here? The way that's what I got from what you just explained, that there was this recognition, that this reminder of who you really are that
Mhm.
overcame you. Is that correct? That it was kind of like a feeling of like, you know, almost like a reality kicked in, a reality of
Yeah.
everything around you.
Yeah, yeah, but in the opposite way of what you just described, where it was like
Okay.
I thought until that point, because I was repressing all the memories of trauma. So I thought until that point that what I had lived through was normal and that I was at fault for what I had lived through. At that point in time, I had repressed memories come to the surface of my psyche of abuse, of all sorts of stuff. Yeah. So I had the opposite experience. So
Okay.
but what you're describing, I started to come to later in pieces because by the point at which I had escaped and was in that state of having all sorts of repressed memories coming to the surface of my psyche, I was a shell of who I used to be. So you asked me who I was before, that
Mm-hmm.
very bubbly, innocent person. By this point in time, I was gone.
Mm-hmm.
I was gone. My personality was not bubbly. It was very aggravated. I felt very animalistic. I didn't feel human. I felt on edge all the time. I didn't feel like I could trust anyone or anything. I didn't feel safe anywhere in the world. My body had taken on the experience of trauma as well. So I could see it on my face. Like part of my face was down. It was very odd seeing myself in the mirror. And I could see like in my eyes, there was just a lack of life in my eyes as well.
Mm-hmm.
My hips were in so much pain. I felt tingling in the top of my head, like if I was going to start to lose my hair. Like I had so much stuff that my body went through as a result of everything that I took on.
Right.
And so all of that is what I came to during that initial period of time of having all these repressed memories coming to the surface of my psyche, realizing that I was completely suppressing the
Mm.
memories and the recognition that I had been abused, and then having my brain rewrite itself to understand that I had lived through an actual nightmare. And that's why I was as broken as I was. And then after that is when I sprung back to life and I started to remember who I was again. So I was very intentional during that period of time of trying to remember who I was in that before period, because that's when I felt alive. I didn't feel alive anymore. So when I wrote to you in the email, I haven't actually gone through a near-death experience, but I've been through one that felt like a near-death
Yeah.
experience
Yeah, absolutely.
because that's how I described this period of time. It felt like I died and I was reborn. That's how it felt. It was that stark. It was that horrendous. It felt like I died. Like
Right.
that me is gone and I was reborn. And the way that I was reborn in part was by being very diligent about finding evidence of who I used to be and trying to remember that person so that that person could save me.
So, okay, so what I was gonna mention, because now I understand it. So you got to the darkest, deepest depth. You were almost, you were like, it was like you were dying. You were, your body could have been shutting down. I mean, who knows how what would have happened if that would have continued. But you got to this point where it was just, you were at your lowest, and that's when all of the re reality of the abuse came in. Everything you
Yeah.
went through, the nightmare of your life, the things you lived, and then that's when you recognized it. Okay, so you're recognizing it as the way it is in its whole. And then here's what I would ask you, right?
Yeah.
So some, it could be anyone listening to this, could be anyone just interested in this. You know, one of the hardest things for me to hear about that, and I don't know you, but I still feel empathy for everybody I talk to. And the thing that gets to me is I go, how can someone get to that point before they get to where you had to get to?
What
You
do you
know,
mean?
meaning, how can someone who's going through the things you went through start to heal from it without having to go that low to the point where you are shutting down, your face is drooping, your hair's falling out, you're not wanting to be here, right? Like, is
Yeah.
there not a way to do that? Or are you,
Yeah.
and is that, and I guess that would probably lead into the healing and what you're doing with what, the work you do with people. And like,
Yeah.
I'm just wanting to know if you can give a little insight on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of things come to mind. One is I'm very stubborn, and that's been a very double-edged sword in this life. So stubbornness has helped save my life and has helped me help others many times. But the other side of that sword is it's also been the reason why I've stayed in things for too long when I should have left earlier. It's been a component of it. And so that was a contributor to why I got that low. Another contributor was the nature of gaslighting. It brainwashes you. And so it's almost like you're entering a cave of brainwash. And the deeper that you go into it, the longer that you're in it, the further and further away that your memory of reality gets, the dimmer it gets. And so you are um, put into an environment in which the longer you stay, the longer that you're likely to stay. So
Okay.
does someone have to go through that? Hell no. No, absolutely not. But I will say that it's very hard to reach someone that is going through abuse. Uh I have so two things. One is I've always been a very service-oriented person who is very protective of the people around me, and that's because I didn't have a lot of protection myself. So I don't want other people to go through what I've gone through. I also have not just CPTSD, but I have various forms of PTSD. Part of one of my triggers for PTSD if I see someone going through abuse or oppression or violence or toxicity, whether it's by a person or by a system or by a group of people, it's a trigger for me because it reminds me of that. It's a very visceral thing that I have felt inside of my body. So that both of those things have contributed to my helping people throughout this journey. And I've had mixed results. And so I've seen it on the ground how hard it is to reach someone who is in that experience and they're just not ready. They're not ready to hear that the person that they love with their whole heart, their whole lives is hurting them, and that it is likely intentional given the pattern of behavior and their own attempts to change that behavior that's hurting them and the lack of follow-up on that, especially the lack of sustained follow-up, right? There's always that, or there can often be a short period of time of perceived change if the aggressor sees their victim is on the verge of leaving, for example. But if it's true change, it will be sustained change. If it's manipulative change, it will be short change, and then there will be a reversion back to the same tactics, and it'll be more heightened the next time around because of um, the experience of the, just the abuser themselves being very upset that their victim dared like consider leaving. So all of that was context to say, no, people don't have to stay in something that is that awful and that horrendous.
Mhm.
But I understand it when people do. I understand the inside of it when people do. What does it take to come out of that? It takes a hell of a lot of self-love, a lot of self-love, a lot of critical thinking, a lot of reflection. It takes a lot of the things that society conditions us away from, which is why I do what I do. So when I came out of abuse, I realized, oh my God, all of society made me an easy target. That's what I realized. I'm a very
Mhm.
highly analytical person. And I have street smarts and I have book smarts. And I still was abused. But in coming out of that experience, I was able to see things in a way that I wouldn't have been able to if I didn't have both street smarts and book smarts. And again, I realized this made me an easy target. 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 And these all things contribute to why it's so hard to escape and why it's so hard to heal, because it's the very things that society conditions you away from that are the things that you need in order to understand that what you're living through is not normal, that
Mhm.
it's harming you, and that it's progressive, and that you deserve better. So things like always chasing after external validation. Society trains us into that. Feeling like you need to buy something, you need to consume something in order to fill a hole inside of yourself. That makes you an easy target. Feeling like your worthiness lies in being partnered with someone. especially as a woman, makes you an easy target. So there's so many things and hustle culture, right? Which even if you're not directly yourself part of hustle culture, you're still surrounded by it. And so you're surrounded by the peer pressure to adhere to certain tenets of hustle culture. That makes you an easy target. Because if you're always on, you're not resting, you're not pausing, you're not reflecting, you can't put the puzzle pieces together.
Right. Right.
Also, society makes you think as you get older, your body breaks down.
Hmm.
So this is something that I thought. I thought my body is breaking down, my face is starting to look the way that it is because I'm getting older. No, what I experienced after escaping was de-aging. That
Right.
should not happen. If it's true that the reason why my body and my face were breaking down was because of age, it's not true. So there's so many things that society teaches us to believe is normal or true that works
Mm.
horribly against us in these types of situations, which is what I'm strongly passionate about now.
Right. I was just gonna say that works so against us because then it no again we go back to normalizing. It normalizes the behavior, normalizes the things you're even recognizing. So you're going, oh, like you always have a reason for why these things are happening. And it
Yes.
that can be just very deceiving and almost it can make it so you can't actually see the reality of what's actually happening around you.
Yes.
Right.
Which is what happened to me.
Right.
So I thought this is because of this other reason that has nothing to do with him.
Yeah.
This is because of this other reason that has nothing to do with him. So I couldn't put it all together. And that was even my own self, right? My own internal matrix that made it hard for me to understand that what I was living was harmful and not normal. Then there were the external factors. Your abusers isolate you from anyone who will pit you against them or not pit. Let me rephrase that. Your abuser isolates you from anyone that can see through their
Right.
bull
Mm-hmm.
and they'll pit you against them. And so when I escaped, I was actually rescued. And my abuser, who is covert, he really liked to present a certain public facade to seem like the world's best partner. Went with me to the airport. And on the surface, it seems like he was trying to help me. But what actually happened on the ground was he tried delaying my flight multiple times. He tried starting a fight. He tried pitting me against the people who were coming to rescue me, even though I didn't know that they were coming to rescue me. I didn't know what was happening. He tried all these different tactics that I couldn't see through because I was so bought into the idea that this person was a good person who actually loved me, who actually cared about me. And
Right.
with that theory so solidly in my head, I couldn't see through the reality of what was until I left. And then I realized everything, and it was a nightmare.
Right.
Then I was able to see it.
Right. Okay. So, and that to me sounds like narcissism. You're the way that you're explaining, and and it's weird because especially if you're someone who is a loving individual, you see the good in people. Those type of characters traits can also work against you because then you think, well, no, there's no way they would treat me that way. And even myself, I hear something like that and I think, well, I'm sure that person didn't intend to be that way. And maybe they didn't, but hey, but they're still doing it. And you have to recognize that because that's not healthy and good for you. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter if that person even recognizes it. And that's
Yes.
something that people who are very in touch with their feelings have to understand that if just because you're a very loving individual, it doesn't mean you need to be treated terribly.
Yes.
It's either you're being treated poorly or you're not, period.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that's a very difficult
Yes.
thing to start to understand. Yeah.
Yes. So
Yeah.
a couple things. Oh man, I wish. Can you speak to my younger self, please?
Sure, let's rewind. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
Go back in a couple years, a decade
right.
or so.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, one thing that I found common. So narcissists tend to target the same type of person. They tend to be very empathic, very giving, very service oriented. They tend to have holes inside of them of worthiness. They want to help other people to help themselves because they don't feel worthy of helping themselves. They don't think that anyone's actually going to help them unless they give part of their own soul to that person. So there's a lot of commonalities between victims. And what you just said speaks to some of the stuff that I believed as well. It's like, well, I can handle anything and I need to be able to be there for this person. and I need to earn love. Even if I didn't think of that directly in those terms, it's what I believed, you know? And so, and also intention, 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 intention. That person doesn't mean to hurt me. They don't mean to hurt me. They don't mean to hurt me. They don't mean to hurt me. So who I am now, oh, so different. So different. I care about intention, but impact 100 times trumps intention.
Mm.
100 times. Because you don't actually know what a person's intention is. You can be the world's best reader of body language, and then, yes, you can think about intention. And yes, I do still think about intention all the time based on reading people's body language. But having had the experience of being in such close quarters with someone who is sadistically hurting me while telling me that they loved me to my face and in front of couples therapists, I know that it's very easy to present a facade, right? A facade of intention,
Yes.
a facade of I didn't mean to, of a facade of I didn't know what was happening, a facade of it was an accident. It
Hmm.
was an accident. It was an accident.
Hmm.
And that's a common thing you see with abusers,
Right.
especially covert ones. Like, I didn't mean to. Will you forgive me? I didn't
Right.
mean to. Will you forgive me? I didn't mean to. Will you forgive me? And to your point, yeah, it doesn't ultimately matter. Like, even if they don't mean to, there's a pattern of behavior there that you have to be mindful of and then take action accordingly. But also, there's a coming to terms with the fact that if someone keeps doing the same thing to you while saying that they didn't mean it, they might be lying to you.
Hmm. They could be. They could be. Or they could be, their intention could be one thing, but it's still going to lead to the same outcome, which is abuse. Like they're just because, their intention, and that's their intention. I really liked what you said about impact over intention. I wrote that down because the impact that someone has on you speaks much stronger than intention. I'm a lover of intention. I've always said intention is important, but that's my own intention. I know my intention.
Hmm.
And I can think someone has an intention, and maybe they do, but they may not. Their idea of what intention is could be different than mine. Whereas the
Yeah.
impact on me, I will reflect on immediately. I know, like, okay, this
Yes.
impacted me in this way. I really
Yes.
like that. And I think as soon as people can recognize the impact that people have on,
Yes.
then you no longer
Yes.
go into that, especially me being, I'm the same way. I'm a very loving individual, and I'll be like, oh, but their intention was good. Or that it's like, no, 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 wait, how did that make me feel?
Yes.
Hmm, feel it. And then you
Yes.
kind of know. And that's
Yeah.
probably one of the things people that are in these situations can start to work on, right? To start to, because one of the questions I was going to ask you is if there was two or three things that you could give as advice to what you did to get out of this situation. Would that be one of them? Is looking at the impact?
It's pausing. Pausing. So what saved my life was pausing. I was dying near the end of my experience, and I was finally able to reach somebody who was able to get through to me and say, I can't help you with this because if I help you, it'll mean going back to this and it'll mean harm to you. That caused me to slow down. And the next time that I entered into an abusive situation that I didn't know was abuse with my abuser, who was trying to break me down and convince me that I was an angry monster, and he succeeded what he had been trying to for years to convince me that that's who I was. I paused. For the first time, I paused and I noticed that he was gleeful, and it confused me
Hmm.
because I was like, I still thought I was in a reciprocal thing. So I was like, why is my partner getting giddy right now when I'm broken? And I'm expecting right now him to say, "Oh, I'm sorry too about this and this and this." And he was giddy and he started posting on social media that we were going to do something tomorrow. And I was like, what are you talking about? This is not normal. That pause allowed me to realize on some level, this is not normal. This person cannot learn, cannot change, and therefore I need to leave. I still thought what I was going through was normal-ish,
Mm-hmm.
but that moment in time of pausing was what really catapulted my being able to extract. myself or allow myself to be extracted from the situation. So it's
Right.
pausing, it's reflecting. It's something that you commented earlier of like my ability to be able to peel apart my own psyche. Yeah, that's because I'm intentional about it. And that's something that I would want to encourage literally every single person on this planet. If there's one thing that you can do, it's pause and reflect. That's it. And self-care, toss that in there too. We all
Self-care.
need mountains more self-care.
Yeah.
But for a lot of us who are in that situation, we don't feel worthy of self-care. We don't think it's manageable. We don't think it's possible. We create all sorts of excuses for we can't have it and don't blah, 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 right?
Right.
But you can pause.
Hmm.
You can pause and you can notice. You can ask yourself questions like, do I want to be doing this? Why? Why?
Yeah.
Why? Add layers of why.
Yeah.
Add
That's a
layers of it.
that's a big one.
Layers. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a foundation to everything. Because if you start doing that, you'll start to realize what's not in alignment with you, what's causing harm, and it'll start to collapse those very things that need to be collapsed.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing. It's hard. It's hard when you've built an entire life or portions of life off of a faulty foundation of lies. But it is so necessary and important and good when you can see it and challenge it and rebuild, and it is worth it.
Yeah.
100% of it is.
I love all that. And I was gonna say for anyone, that can actually identify with that, that asking why, there's probably a lot of fear around that. And what I would say is try to break that fear and start asking the questions. If you ask the questions why and you pause and reflect and you feel great, that's great. There's no harm in asking why. But it's like you have to get past the fear too, right? Of asking why. Because
Oh,
I would assume a lot of people in that situation don't want to ask that. They don't want to stop and ask that question because then the truth that they're feeling might start to
yeah.
come out, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what I'll say to that is every single person who is enduring any form of hardship is a lot stronger than they actually know that they are.
Mm,
Blanket statement that I know is true. There's no hesitation. I know that that's true because you're surviving what you're surviving. That means
yeah.
you're made of strong stuff. Even if you feel weak, you're strong, right? And so it isn't a moving through fear. It's sitting with it. So you ask why and you start to feel anxious. Hold yourself. Don't run away. Don't chastise yourself because you want to run away or whatever. Put your hand on your heart. Put another hand on your solar plexus. Breathe. Add in more pause. Breathe. Notice how your body is responding. Just notice. Notice how it's feeling. Notice the beating of your heart. Notice your fingertips. Notice the sensation that you feel in your skin. Notice the breathing pattern. Notice. And then start to ask yourself, what am I feeling? Why? What do I need right now to help me to feel better? And then as you feel ready, whether it's 2 seconds later or 2 years, it doesn't matter. You dive into those deeper layers and you do it for you. You do it for you because you're worth it.
Mm,
There's so many of us that are conditioned to fight for other people, myself included. But who is the most important person for you to fight for? It's you. And if you can't think of it that way, then think about the little you. The little 3-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-old is still present within you. That person needs defending, that person needs fighting, and it's a very real thing. You pause and you think about you when you were that age, you still feel strong emotions if there's something that you went through that brings that up, that's still present within you. So you do these things for you. You change your motivation, you change your incentive for doing these things to be kind to you, to learn to be kind to you, and you understand why that's so important.
mm,
You are a deserving human being who's likely been taught by people and whole systems that you're not. Fight it. And yes, you can. and you do it through the pause.
Right.
You you
Yeah.
do it by going within. You do it by finding that flow.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of like a form of meditation in a way, right? Going inward. And it's interesting. You also said self-care, right? That can be meditation. But you're right. When
Yeah.
you're in those places, a lot of times you're not doing that self-care. So it's such a big piece of it to stop and reflect and all these things. So I really appreciate you. Is now, do you do this? You mentioned Azteco, or sorry, Azteca, right? Is it called
Yes.
Azteca? I told you I was going to mess that up. And is that the name of the company that you work with and work with your coaching and things
Sounded.
like that? Okay.
Yeah.
Can you explain
Yeah.
a little bit about that and how people can connect with you or
Yeah,
what kind of
absolutely.
work you do? Yeah.
Yeah. So with Astekah, I support women who have also gone through abusive relationships, abusive workplaces, toxic situations, systemic oppression, and it's affected them in a way that they don't feel worthy. They feel imposter syndrome. They feel diminishment of joy, of life force, and they want that back. So I help them to navigate the experience of getting back their feeling of worthiness, their feeling of joy, their remembrance that they are badasses. And I do that through a group coaching program that combines meditation and coaching and education and other good things to be able to support them in that process. Yeah.
Wow, nice. Is there a website? Is it just
Yeah.
what's the website for that?
So it's astekah.com, Astekah.com.
That makes it easy and people can go there. And then you said there's different things you do, whether it's
Yeah.
one-on-one or coaching or group coaching, you
Yes.
said?
Yeah.
That's
I do
great.
one-on-one. I have group coaching. I have meditations. I have workbooks as well, Spanish and in English.
I love all this. There's a question that I always ask people, and it's in every episode I do. I don't know if you've checked out any other episodes on Soul Inspired, but one of the main things, sometimes I'm hoping my guests haven't because I want to surprise them with the last question or one of the last questions. And it's because yours is a different situation. And I've said this, it's a very easy question for me to ask when people have had a near-death experience or something
Mm.
spiritual that's happened to them. But the question is really, if you look at your life and the things you've gone through, what you've overcome, who you are now, and the work that you're doing and the help that you're providing the world, the, the simple question of why do you believe we're here? Why are we here as human beings? Why are we here? What comes to you naturally first? That's a
I
big
love this question.
question. It's a big question, right? It's a big question. I've had a few people need to take a minute and then I edit later and I make it seem like they answered it in 3 seconds, but really they took about 2 minutes. Not everybody can answer that right away because it's like, oh my God, I've never contemplated why I'm here. That's
Yeah.
that's a huge question, but you've gone through a lot. And
Yeah.
so it's a lot of life experience. And I'm just curious what you feel is the reason why we come here.
Yeah. So it's actually a question that I've thought about a lot for like half my life. So I love this question.
Okay. That's perfect then.
Yeah. Yeah. So a few different layers to that. I think so bringing in spirituality, I think that we're all expressions of God. I think that God is energy. It's intelligent energy. And so everything in existence is an expression of God. And we get to experience that with the ability to move around and with the ability to think and critically think. So I think we're all expressions of God living life and experiencing it. And for the purpose of growth and joy. That's what I think is the
Mm.
ultimate purpose. Growth and joy, growth and joy. So that's what I think the purpose of relationships is, or friendships, or anything. It's growth and joy, growth and joy.
I love that. And I'm going to say joy in itself, when people hear the word joy, they feel so good. Everybody wants joy in their
Yes.
life. I don't believe there's many people out there that don't want joy. And if you don't, you know, you got some work because I think joy is just such a good feeling. It's that thing that everybody I believe is after. So
Yeah.
don't forget your joy. And the way that I would leave this, and this is just my own feelings after this conversation, is that nobody out there is alone. There's always a way out of a situation, and I I I'm ass- I'm I'm assuming you agree with that with the work
Yeah.
you do,
Yeah.
and and that's the message I got from this conversation, is that you overcame a lot of things. We didn't even have to go into detail of what those things were, but we know that those were hardships and things that other people go through hardships, but that anyone can overcome anything if they work on themselves. That's what I got out of everything. So I'm just appreciative of you coming on. And if you have any final messages for the audience, you can let us know. But it's been a real joy having you on, and I've really enjoyed it. It's been great.
Thank you. It's been wonderful as well. No, just it was a pleasure to get to be here. Happy to be able to share. And I feel very deeply connected to humanity as a whole, most especially people who are going through hardship. And I'm actually really excited because I know what's on the other side of hardship. I know what's on the other side of healing. And so when I see humanity or whole swaths of humanity going through a lot of hardship, there's a big part of me that even if I don't express it, is connected to joy because I know that on the other side of that is so much good. So that's what I want to impart as a final word.
Well, I'm sure everybody's appreciative that you're doing it, and thanks again for coming on. I turn to the audience to say, please like, share, and subscribe. As
Yes.
usual, this is the only way I can get Soul Inspired to get out to everybody. These messages will help someone. If you know someone that could be helped by this, share it, even privately, anything. But thank you to everybody who's been subscribing, and thanks again for coming on tonight and sharing your inspiring story with us.
Thank you so much, Joe.